While the label Last Comanche may seem somewhat exaggerated, it does serve as a symbolic representation rather than a literal meaning. It acknowledges the ongoing presence of the Comanche people who thrive within a vibrant community in Oklahoma. The choice of this title aims to capture the essence and transformation within the Comanche Nation, marking the conclusion of an era defined by their warrior culture. Quanah Parker stands out as the most renowned figure in Comanche history, facing formidable challenges to ensure the safety of his people. Despite not holding the formal title of head chief, he is widely recognized as the ultimate leader of the Comanche. The pivotal Red River War, as discussed in one of our previous videos, marked a significant turning point for the Comanche people. In the aftermath, Quanah Parker assumed the weighty responsibility of surrendering his nation to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Quanah Parker was actually born into the Nakoni Band, or the Wanderers, under the Comanche umbrella. He then spent his formative years with the Quahandes, where his parents, notable parents, Quahande Comanche Chief Pete Nakona, and his mother, Cynthia Ann Parker, which was actually a white settler who was abducted at the age of 8, assimilated into the tribe. More on Cynthia Ann Parker before we go further into Quanah's life. Cynthia Ann Parker was born around 1827 and belonged to a prominent Parker frontier family that settled in East Texas in the 1830s. In a dramatic turn of events, she was captured by the Comanches at the age of 8 or 9 during the raid on Fort Parker, which is in present-day Groesbeck, Texas, in 1836. Bestowed with the Comanche name Nadau, meaning foundling for you Mandalorian fans. Foundlings. She was embraced by the Nakoni Band of Comanches, and she became the foster daughter of Tabby Noko, which is a chief there, fully assimilating into Comanche life. Cynthia Ann Parker married Pete Nakona, the Quahande warrior chief, known as a bunch of different names, but the main name is Pete Nakona. Quanah Parker, their firstborn, entered the world in the Wichita Mountains of southwestern Oklahoma around 1850, according to his letter to rancher Charles Goodnight. Alternative sources suggested his birthplace as Laguna Sabinas, or Cedar Lake in Gaines County, Texas. Cynthia Ann Parker and Pete Nakona also had 2 more children, Pecos or Pecan, and Topsana or Prairie Flower. The family faced tumultuous events in December of 1860, when Cynthia Ann Parker and Topsana were captured in the Battle of Peace River. Conflicting accounts arose regarding Pete Nakona's fate, with some asserting he was wounded and killed, while others, including Quanah Parker, dispute this narrative. Subsequently, Cynthia Ann Parker, Quanah Parker's mother, and her infant daughter were taken against their will by the Texas Rangers. After 24 years with the Comanche, Cynthia Ann Parker resisted reassimilation, and her daughter Topsana tragically succumbed to illness in 1863. Struggling with her changed circumstances, Cynthia Ann Parker starved herself to death, so she committed suicide. YouTube doesn't like that word, but we're going to use it for historical references. She committed suicide by starving herself to death in March of 1871. So after the death of Pete Nakona, we think around 1864, with a man named Parakum, or Bull Bear, assuming leadership as the head chief of the Quande people, and Horseback leading the Coney people. Quanah Parker and his brother Pecos found guidance under Horseback's mentorship. Building on the teachings of Pete Nakona and Iron Jacket, Horseback imparted the traditions of the Comanche warrior upon them, and Quanah Parker rose to prominence as a formidable warrior. Departing briefly, he later rejoined the Quande Band alongside warriors from another group. In October of 1867, a young Quanah Parker participated as an observer in treaty negotiations at Medicine Lodge, Kansas, accompanying the Comanche chiefs. Horseback notably spoke about Quanah Parker's refusal to sign the treaty during these negotiations. As the 1870s dawned, the Plains Indians faced mounting challenges in their struggles against the U.S. government for their land. The capture of Kiowa Chief Sitting Bear, Big Tree, and Santana marked a turning point in the Kiowa, Comanche, and Southern Cheyenne tribes joined forces in response. Colonel Ronald Mackenzie, who we've talked about in a previous video, played a key role in rounding up and confronting Indians who had not settled on reservations. They're trying to find them and put them someplace where they didn't have to deal with them on the open plains. In 1873, Isutai, who was a self-proclaimed Comanche medicine man, called for a gathering of all Comanche bands for a Sundance, a Kiowa ritual not typical among the Comanche. At the gathering near the Red River, Isutai and Quanah Parker recruited warriors for retaliatory raids into Texas. However, some Comanche chiefs, including Isarosa, a man named Sound of the Sunrise, recognized the real threat posed by buffalo hide merchants to their way of life. Suggesting an alternative target, these chiefs proposed focusing on the merchants rather than engaging in raids. A war party influenced by Isutai's claim of protective medicine headed towards the training post of adobe walls. Keep referencing it, but we've talked about the Comanche before. I have a whole video on the adobe walls. We're going to touch on it briefly, but there is an intricate video about the importance of the adobe walls battle in Super North Texas. The attempted raid on adobe walls, marked by the resilience of the saloon keeper and merchants armed with 50 caliber Sharps rifles, resulted in a decisive turning point. Quanah Parker, leading the charge, faced adversary as his horse was shot from underneath him, and he himself sustained a non-fatal injury. The attack triggered a shift in Washington's policy, leading to the Red River War, culminating in the Battle of Palo Duro Canyon on September 28, 1874. Mackenzie, our old friend Mackenzie, we touched on briefly in his Tonkawa Scouts, who are actually found a lot more in central Texas, where I am, and kind of allied with the Americans to scout specifically against the Comanche. We're going to do a video just on the Tonkawa. So the Tonkawa Scouts dismantled along with the U.S. forces, dismantled the Comanche village at Palo Duro, dealing a significant blow and destroying nearly all of the Comanche horses, which was their source of wealth and power. It's about 1,500 horses died during this. That's a lot. The Comanche ultimately kind of surrendering in 1875, so collaborating with Colonel Mackenzie and Indian agent James M. Hayworth. Quanah Parker played a pivotal role in the resettlement of the Comanche onto the Kiowa Comanche Apache Reservation in southwestern Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma. So let's move on a little bit towards Quanah Parker's life after his warrior. So we know he's famous before that, but he gets really important going further. He does a lot for the Comanche. Some of it is people think it is a good thing. Some of them think he's just a complete sellout, but we're here to just report on that. So they put Quanah Parker into the reservation. They built him a massive house. It's still standing. It's called the Star House in Cache, Oklahoma, and that was his residence. I'll show pictures of it, but it is like a traditional house with heat and stars literally on the roof and big beams, front porches. So he started drawing a lot of attention from other tribe members and also very important people in America, specifically one of the most famous presidents of the time, and maybe ever in the United States, President Theodore Roosevelt. Quanah Parker would engage in hunting excursions with Roosevelt, forging a unique connection between them. Despite such associations, he diverged from mainstream norms. He did not believe in monogamy or the traditional Protestant church, but instead, Quanah Parker embraced the tenets of the Native American church movement, standing as one of its founding members. So the choice reflected his commitment to preserving and advancing the spiritual heritage of his people. So, accepting that their way of life has come to an end. But we're not going to give up on everything. We're going to push forward and change a couple of things, but keep on to our own traditions. So, with Quanah Parker being credited as one of the early leaders of the Native American church movement, his main addition to that was the introduction of the peyote religion with the psychedelic drug that you see in the peace pipes into the peace pipe. Native American church movement. So this followed after he had a near-fatal encounter with a bull in Texas. Pretty Texas of him to almost be killed by a bull, where he sustains pretty severe wounds. Seeking healing, a Mexican curandera prepared a potent peyote tea, say that 3 times prepared a potent peyote tea, sparking Quanah Parker's involvement with the peyote religion. He was taught that peyote was a sacred medicine used with water during Native American church ceremonies. So Quanah Parker endorsed the half-moon style of the peyote ceremony, distinct from the later cross ceremony influenced by Kato practices introduced by John Wilson. Quanah Parker has a really cool quote about this. So one of the main things he talked about the difference between the white man's church and Indian church is he would say, quote, "The white man goes into church, into his church house, and talks about Jesus, but the Indian goes into his teepee and talks to Jesus." I think that's a pretty incredible quote. So the modern reservation era in Native American history owes much of the adoption of the church and Christianity is spearheaded by Quanah Parker and a man named John Wilson, which we talked about for a second there. Although not part of a traditional Native American, like religious practices, this movement gained prominence in the late 19th century, blending cultures from both Native Americans of Mexico and other southern tribes with ancient use of peyote spiritual practices. So Quanah Parker advocated for the mindful use. Let's circle back on that. The mindful use, not just smoking peyote all day, but using it, the mind-altering substances for ritual purposes. So while Quanah Parker, as we said before, he earned praise for cultural guardianship amongst many tribes, he is not immune to criticism, particularly from some Comanche quarters. Detractors argued that he had sold out to the white man, which I can see that. We fight to the end, and I mean, they did get kind of whipped in adobe walls, but they did surrender, and he adapted his life to like a traditional rancher's lifestyle. Critics pointed to his dressing and his living style, which some perceived as more like European American than traditional Comanche. A man named Paul Schatz Smith framed the debate as the basic Comanche political question. Is questioning whether Quanah Parker is a sellout or a patriot. But he did embrace European American customs, but he did also maintain his identity by consistently wearing his hair long in braids. It's like every single picture we have shown is him in his braids, which are so awesome looking. And he still resisted the conformity of us mayor's laws. He had up to 8 wives at the same time, so he was not going to get rid of that part of his culture. So let's move on to how we know some of this stuff and his life aside from the church. So we can see a correspondence between Quanah Parker and a man named Samuel Birch Burnett Sr. and his son, Thomas Lloyd Burnett, reveal mutual admiration and respect. See, while historical records provide limited information about Quanah Parker, until his involvement in the attack on buffalo hunters' adobe walls. There's only like fragmented details with his interaction with Apache, and that could lead to, how he discovered the peyote religion, kind of dipping his toes into that, and taking the adoption of the Native American church. So Quanah Parker's involvement, kind of evolved on tribal lands, opening for Anglo ranching interests. It led to close relations with Texas cattlemen, including the Burnett family, which we just talked about. So he said, if we're going to put on this reservation, we're going to make some money on it, because it's not going to be really given to us. We can see that now it's its penance. So by 1884, Quanah Parker's efforts facilitated the tribe's first grass payments for grazing rights, strengthening the bonds between him and his friends, the Burnetts. Burnett with a general, like a genuine respect for Native American rights, learned and embraced Comanche ways, passing his appreciation, and friendship to his family. The Comanches bestowed upon him the name, and I'm trying to pronounce it, Massasoit, meaning big boss. Pretty cool name. Reflecting the regard for Burnett. Quanah Parker's adaptation to the white man's life led to prosperity as a rancher. And you can, like I said, you can still see Star House, to this day. It was part of an amusement park, kind of moved to somebody's actual property. There's been a lot of movement for people to take that, you know. Have that moved to like a place where it can be preserved. Right now they can't get through to the owner for them to let go of Star House. It is owned on somebody's property. You can drive by it. It's in pretty bad disrepair. But if you read the most recent book about Quanah Parker's life, and it just escapes me at this second, but they kind of go into some detail about it. So, over the next 27 years, Quanah Parker and the Burnetts shared numerous experiences, including their involvement in public events and discussions with, Theodore Roosevelt, like we talked about earlier. Burnett's assistance in significant manners, such as Quanah Parker's request to retain tribal ownership of lands in the relocation of his mother and sister's remains, further solidified their enduring friendship. So, in 1872, Quanah Parker, according to his son, Baldwin Parker, who actually filmed in some, like was an actor in certain, like some silent films, which is kind of wild that we're not that far removed from Quanah Parker and the Wild West. Baldwin Parker said that Quanah entered matrimony with 2 wives. His first, Tahia, hailed from the Mescalero Apache tribe, the daughter of their chief Old Wolf. Acquiring her for 5 mules, doesn't seem like that much. Their union only lasted a year as Tahua struggled with the Comanche language. Upon her request to return home, Quanah Parker sent her back to her people. His second wife, in 1872, Wikia, was the daughter of Yellow Bear, a Panatica Comanche sub-chief. Despite initial complications, including her engagement to another warrior, some Comanche drama for you, she and Quanah Parker eloped, later reconciling with Yellow Bear. The amalgamation of the 2 bands formed the largest force of Comanche Indians. Quanah Parker eventually took 6 wives, or 6 more wives. I'm sorry, and their names I'm going to try to pronounce. Choni or Shoni, Maketa Vuki, Butum Takum, Kolbe Topai, and Tanarsi. A photograph from the 1890s, captured by William B. Ellis, showcased Quanah Parker and 2 of his wives, identified as Topay and Shoni. In addition, Quanah Parker had a total of 8 wives and 25 children, and he adopted some of them. On the day that Quanah Parker took his last breath, his wives and children quietly mourned his departure, making marking the occasion with two distinct ceremonies. An article published on March 29th of 1911 in Leavenworth Times of Leavenworth, Kansas, detailed the first ceremony, which was a tribal ritual. As the sun rose in the day following Quanah's passing, Marcus Poco, a chief medicine man and preacher for the tribe, led the observation, or observance. I'm sorry. Marcus Polo believed that, to have Mexican and Comanche roots, he donned a buckskin suit, adorned with a buckskin bag containing the chief's cherished feathers, trinkets, and jewelry, including a diamond brooch presented by his cattlemen. Friends, commencing their observance, Marcus Poco praised the chief and invoked the Great Spirit to welcome him. Subsequently, the funeral procession proceeded to the location for the second ceremony, held at the Post Oak Mission Cemetery. The second ceremony unfolded at 3 p.m. And was overseen by Reverend A.J. Becker, a local Mennonite missioner. Reverend Becker and his wife, Magdalena, had dedicated themselves to missionary work among the Comanche since the establishment of the Post Oak Mission around a decade prior. Following the sermon, attendees joined in singing the swan dirge, and then the chief was laid to rest near the resting place of his mother, Cynthia, who, remember, they got there. Her remains moved. Reverend and Mrs. Becker continued their service at the mission until the minister's retirement in 1941, forming close bands with the Comanche people, and who affectionately gave them nicknames. In his book, The Last Comanche Chief, author Bill Neely reflects on Quanah and Cynthia, stating, quote, "Separated in life, they were united until, united in death." In 1957, a significant expansion of Fort Sill led to the reburial of Cynthia and Quanah at the Fort Sill Post Cemetery in Lawton, which you can actually go see today.